everybody, welcome back to my channel. We are going to be talking about today all the books that I read in May. It's actually the 31st today, so the very last day, but I know realistically I'm not going to be finishing any more books today. But nonetheless, May has been my best reading month so far this year. I also ended up taking part in 2 readathons, but as always we'll start off with the monthly stats. I know it says I read 10 books in May, but I actually DNF'd one book, and the spreadsheet I use, it counts DNFs as books read. But either way, I read 9 books this month. 5 of them were graphic novels, but nonetheless, that is the most amount of books I've read in a month this year, which obviously I'm very happy with. So I've read 2,641 pages, I listened to 5 hours of audiobooks, and my average rating was 4.61111. I bought 3 books, I had 3 rereads, and I read 3 own voices books as well. The first book I read in May was Homebody by Ruby Kaur. This is the latest of Ruby Kaur's poetry. I know she's a bit controversial, if that's the right word, but I have read and loved her previous books, so naturally I gave this a go. The synopsis on Goodreads will probably explain this collection better than I could. It's a reflective and intimate journey visiting the past, the present and the potential of the self. Homebody is a collection of raw, honest conversations with oneself, reminding readers to fill upon love, acceptance, community, family and embrace change. Like I said, I've read Ruby Kaur's previous books and this definitely met my expectations and perhaps even exceeded them a little bit. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I would say that mental health is a big theme of this book. The first section, Mind, I really loved, and it was probably my favourite section. I really could have tabbed every single poem in that section. Within the past year, mental health has really been at the forefront for me, so I think that those themes in her writing were very relatable. I saw some criticism that she basically has written about the same thing 3 times, but I think that's a bit unfair, to be honest. Often you will look upon past experiences and because of time passing and your own personal growth, you will think differently about those things. New feelings and thoughts may emerge, and it's definitely a good form of catharsis to write about how you're feeling. I know in general people are critical of Ruby Kaur's poetry, but she writes stuff that I can connect to. I think she's a good writer because she can say so little and make you feel so much. Like, just 2 lines will unlock something inside of you and encourage you to look deeper within yourself. Maybe it'll make you think about the things that we as women are taught to believe about ourselves, or just make you think, oh, I feel like this too. I initially planned to read this to fulfill the buzzwordathon prompt for May, to read books with house or home in the title, but it also fulfilled a prompt for the Asian readathon to read a book written by an Asian author. Next, I reread Heartstopper Volume 1 to 3 and read Heartstopper Volume 4. I did a vlog about reading all of these, so I'll keep this kind of brief. First volume is basically friends to lovers romance, and the second volume is about Nick figuring out his sexuality and coming out to some people close to him. Volume 3 is they're on a school trip to Paris and navigating coming out to the school and coming out as them being in a relationship. And Volume 4 is building upon the themes of mental health that were initially explored in Volume 3. Charlie has quite a few mental health issues that him and Nick are trying to sort out as a couple. It's a lot about Nick trying to save or help Charlie but then realising that he can't, and it's mostly focused on the recovery aspect of mental health, which I really appreciated. And I think Alice Oseman made a smart decision doing that, to try and keep the overall wholesome and comforting tone of the series and not trigger any readers. It was still definitely the most emotional book in the series, but it left you feeling warm and fuzzy at the same time. In case it wasn't obvious, I gave all of these 5 stars, and I will link in the description and in the cards the vlog where I read the whole series. Next, we unfortunately have my first DNF of the year, and that is Like Home by Louisa Onome. This is about our main character Chinilo, or Nilo as her best friend Kate calls her. She has grown up in a neighbourhood called Ginger East that has unfortunately changed over the years due to gentrification. Plus there was an incident a few years ago that meant that all of their closest friends moved away, so it's only been Nilo and Kate for a few years, and Kate's family owned a convenience store that gets vandalised and it gets an awful lot of media coverage, and Nilo is trying to figure out who vandalised Kate's family store, but Kate has become really withdrawn and quiet and is pushing Nilo away, so obviously there's like that to figure out as well. This is described as for fans of Elizabeth Acevedo and Ibiza Boy, both authors that I've read before. I really enjoyed their work. But like I said, I ended up DNFing this book. I DNF'd it at page 159 out of like 400 pages, and I feel terrible about it. It was one of my most anticipated releases of the year. It's a debut novel, and on Goodreads it has an average rating of like 4 stars, but it does only have a few hundred reviews, and it is about really important topics as well. It's about gentrification, property tax. I was just like waiting for it to pick up, and I just wasn't super engaged in the story. Not because I didn't find the story or situation relatable, because obviously with my life experience that's not applicable. I just really struggled to connect to the character and what was going on. The writing is fast paced, but it's all kind of drawn out. I can't believe that this book is like 400 pages long. The main character is 16, but she acts in a pretty juvenile way. Like, she comes off a lot younger than she is. And at the beginning of the book she's freaking out over getting a bra because her mum's suggesting that she gets one, which I know can be a little bit embarrassing, but she was mortified at the mere suggestion, and I just don't think that's believable for her age. I read spoilers about the big reveal at the end. I found one spoiler review on Goodreads, and yeah, I think I wouldn't have enjoyed it. And I think, considering the full implications of what the characters did, I think that would have been rather disappointing. I guess the one positive is that it is a really beautiful cover, but despite me DNFing it, I certainly don't want to detract anybody from reading it, because I'm definitely in the minority. I'd say go on Goodreads, read some reviews from like a wide range of people, so a mixture of positive and negative views, and just make up your own mind over whether this book will be good for you. Next, I read My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness by Kabi Nagata. This is a autobiographical manga by a Japanese author, and it's her experience of trying to figure out her mental well-being and her sexuality. This originally was published online, but now it's been published physically. However, I read it on scribd myself. Also, I read it as part of the Asian readathon, which fulfills 2 prompts to read a non-fiction book and something that isn't US centric. I believe I originally heard of this book from Instagram. I haven't really seen it talked about any other places, but I really like this one. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was a super heartfelt memoir, and I really empathised with the author and the things that she's been feeling. Whilst my life experience doesn't mirror Kabi Nagata's in a lot of ways, I could see a lot of things that I have thought and felt within this book. I loved her realisation of the fact that she needed to start being kinder to herself, and then her reclaiming her self-worth and figuring out her sexuality. For my first ever manga, I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to people who want to read more about LGBT+ experiences and mental health discussions, and don't be put off by like the slightly comical title. And the manga does open with a scene in a hotel room with a female escort, because it is definitely about a lot more than that. Then I listened to the audiobook of the Subtweet by Vivek Shraya. This is an adult contemporary novel about musician Neela Devaki, and when one of the songs gets covered by a rising artist, Rukmini, and that cover version becomes bigger than her original song ever did, a transformative friendship begins. But as Rukmini becomes more popular, Neela is left struggling and jealousy creeps in, and with one single subtweet that Neela makes, the two find themselves in the middle of an internet firestorm. I love music, and that is one of the biggest elements of the book, so that was something I very much enjoyed. I also enjoyed the commentary on social issues and race. Vivek Shraya really interrogates and questions things such as whether it's possible for artists of colour to become truly successful and popular without pandering to white people, plus so much more that is really just scratching the surface. The novel is quite satirical, so it's an entertaining read and listen as well. I do wish that we got to see a bit more of Neela and Rukmini's friendship, and it went more in depth. I also appreciate the fact that there's no romance in this book, which is obviously quite a rarity. I think the main reason that I'm going to be giving this book 4 stars is because of the ending. I'm not the type of person who necessarily needs everything to be wrapped up, but the book just kind of ends. It ends pretty suddenly as well, and there wasn't an explanation or even a little bit of insight into what happened with the main character. The last chapter isn't told entirely from a side character's POV, and I would have liked to see the full details and explanation of the events that happened, and that fulfilled a prompt in the Asian readathon to read a book in your favourite genre. Next, I read Counting Down With You by Tashi Bhuyan. This is a debut novel, a YA contemporary romance about a main character, Karina, a Bangladeshi teenager who is pretty reserved, just wants to keep her head down and follow her parents' rules. Her parents are very strict. They want Karina to pursue a career in medicine when really she wants to study English at college. So when we go abroad to Bangladesh for 28 days, Karina is looking forward to having a bit more freedom. She actually ends up tutoring the school's resident bad boy and fake dating him, and Karina has to kind of make the decision of whether she really likes this guy enough to go against her parents' rules all before they come back from Bangladesh. This book was one of my most anticipated reads of the year. Like I said, it's a debut novel. I initially heard of it because the author is actually a friend of a friend, like said friend is mentioned in the acknowledgements. We're mutuals on Twitter and she was sharing this book before it even had a front cover. I really like this book. In certain parts it got me way more emotional than I expected it to. Definitely got a bit teary-eyed sometimes. This definitely isn't the first book ever with the fake dating trope, but I think the representation of the main character and the side characters really makes the story stand out. Along with that, Karina has anxiety and that is a very central key part of the story, and I could really relate to her on the fear of not wanting to let other people down. There's great character development too with Karina and Ace, the love interest. I think they have a really sweet and healthy relationship. Ace is incredibly caring towards Karina and learns to be respectful of her boundaries and situation. I think the only reason I'm not giving it the full 5 stars is because of her best friends. Well, mainly her best friend's behaviour. Whenever Karina and Ace would be seen together in school, whenever Karina and Ace are hanging out or are seen together in school, both of her best friends act really overdramatic and shot like deer in headlights when they see them. Sure, Ace is super popular, he's the bad boy, but to freak out whenever they're hanging out together I just thought was a little weird and maybe not super realistic, just in my opinion. Nonetheless, I really enjoyed this book. I would recommend it if you're into the fake dating trope and are okay with reading about representations of anxiety. Also, I'm just really happy for the author. The author's notes at the beginning made me a bit emo, and I'm very happy for her, and I definitely think I'll be reading whatever she publishes next. I want to fulfill the prompt in the Asian readathon to read a book with an Asian main character. I read it during the Thingathon, which was a readathon in the last week of May, run by Ashley from Frolic Through Fiction, which the aim of that readathon was basically just to complete your reading goals. One of mine was just to finish this book. Then the last book I read in May and was the second book I read for Do the Thingathon was Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, and this is a collection of essays about the author's perspectives on life, feminism, media and race, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I've had this on my TBR for years. It got published in 2014 and I got it as a gift in 2017. I started reading it in January, but I only just finished reading it in the last couple of days just because other reading plans and life came up, and I really liked a lot of the things that Roxane Gay had to say. In the essay How We All Lose, it's basically about how feminist literature, mostly memoir think pieces, how there's like a lack of nuance in them. Some women write about how we don't need feminism, that we are post-patriarchy, and then some women are like, oh, we haven't made enough progress at all. I even liked it despite it criticising a book that I read in 2013 and I still don't, How to Be a Woman by Caitlin Moran. That was the first book I ever read about feminism, and it did wake me up to how hard women have it and the need for feminism, but at the same time it's a very narrow brand of the feminine experience. I also either completely forgot or completely glossed over some of the questionable things that Caitlin Moran says, or I think my perspective just changed. For example, the whole debate over whether Muslim women wearing the hijab or burqa is oppressive, but I am now of the opinion that white women don't get to define what is oppressive for Muslim women. Caitlin Moran also makes some very strange comparisons to the N-word. I think Caitlin Moran's book was published in 2012, so I hope that her perspective has changed since then. Fingers crossed. The other essay that I really liked was What We Hunger For. It starts off by being about the Hunger Games. I really liked her talk about the success of the Hunger Games. She said that there's merchandise including a Katniss Barbie, which Katniss would absolutely hate because that is so true. But that chapter ends up being about quite a few things, admiring the strength of women and analysing the critique of YA being too hard-hitting and too serious for teenagers when some of the things happening in YA books are the reality for a lot of teenagers, which is kind of a similar thing to how I felt about Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson, which I read last month. One thing I would say is if you have this on your TBR, I would suggest to read it as soon as possible because some of the things talked about are like a little bit outdated. It was published in 2014 as I mentioned, but for example in the essay A Tale of Three Coming Out Stories, she talks about the difference between someone with privilege like Anderson Cooper coming out in 2012 compared to someone with less privilege. So she uses the example of Frank Ocean, you know, a black man coming out as gay who's prominent in the hip hop and R&B scene. Now I think she would definitely be talking about Lil Nas X coming out instead of Frank Ocean as, you know, a more contemporary example of a black man coming out as gay in the hip hop and R&B scene. But yeah, I'll be looking out for Roxane Gay's most recently published works. I'm reading some of that as well. She's a fantastic writer. Not a spawn, but I did take her writing class in Skillshare and it was very interesting and informative. I feel a little bit ironic giving trigger warnings for this book when there's a whole essay about trigger warnings, but trigger/content warning for rape and sexual assault in this book. So those are all the books I read in May. If you have read any of them, then please let me know in the comments down below on what you thought of them as well. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you fancy it and want to see more of my videos. Links to like everything I talked about, like other videos, readathons I took part in will be in the description. And I hope you have a great day and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!